Hello, wonderful. Lovely to see you all, and kind of this week kind of continues from last week, although it does, doesn't it really? So, life. But in terms of, last week we were looking at kind of our practice as loving ourselves, I think. And I just wanted to kind of, I have kind of these little loose themes, so that's kind of still in the air a bit, really. I was thinking that's still kind of in the air. Yeah, we have a few minutes before we sit again. It's a good chance if you've got any questions about your practice or anything. I say this every week, we're in England, so it's kind of quiet. And
when I'm meditating at home, I'm trying to start doing it daily again. What do you suggest that we do as a way of meditating?
You mean as in terms of the practice?
Yeah.
It depends so much on each person. You see, if I came from a particular school, we were just talking about this actually, if I came from, Buddhism or something like that, I would say, this is our practice. One of the reasons I run this is because I'm interested in kind of what lies beyond practice, of kind of, what we really are and what's kind of real about us and what's original. And so when I think about other people who have done that, people like Nisargadatta or Ramana Maharishi or Jesus, people like that. Not that I'm anything like those, but just they try to talk about real things, I suppose. If I think about what Nisargadatta would say, he would just say, sit and look for the I am in you and look for everything that's not the I am and just let it go. That kind of approach has been kind of adapted by, say, the Advaita Vedantists. And so it can seem very similar to that, but people like him would say that they don't belong to any religion or any faith or anything. And I would say the same for myself in a way, that the only thing that is worth anything is what is real, and that's that we are life itself, and so it's to sit in life if you can. But if and it's different for each person, and so it's very, very hard to say. Maybe we just have a cup of tea sometime and have a chat about it. If you're still, and it's not about getting rid of the mind, but if you're still identifying through things in the mind a lot. So say that you have a belief in a religion, for example, and you think that's what you are, or you consider yourself to be of a particular flag or nationality, these are identifications. So what we're looking to do by our practice is to remove the ignorance of what we really are. And so that can be anything. So the most simple practice is something that I love very, very much. And again, we were just talking about this, is just letting your awareness be, which is very close to Zen, just sitting. There's just sitting practice of Zen. So you just sit. And of course you can observe that the mind is moving, which is what we did in a practice just now. You can observe things moving across the mind, but you can also observe that some things you grab onto. And when you grab onto something, notice if you fight with it or not, if it pulls in your heart or not, if it kind of creates emotion or not. And it's not that we're trying to get rid of the natural processes of emotion, but we're just trying to kind of put them back in their proper place of being the emotions are our biofeedback devices, so we know what's going on in life. They're not necessarily true. And it's the same with our thoughts. Our thoughts and our emotions are conditioned. So it's to kind of start seeing what's conditioned. So in Zen, you would just sit for 20 minutes or 40 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever, a couple of times a day, and just let it go. But for some people, that would be too much. So it's about just kind of being honest with ourselves and just kind of, finding a practice that allows us to kind of let go of what's holding us back. We were talking about Pema Chodron, and she has a very beautiful practice, which is a Tibetan practice called Shenpa. And so as you sit, if you're doing the just sitting practice, if you notice that something arises that you're holding on to, perhaps it arises as a bodily feeling or as a strong emotion or something, Shenpa practice is basically just allowing yourself to soften with it. That's all that it is. And it's whatever is arising that day. It's not chasing after anything. And that's it. So I would say something along those lines. But I do think we also, because of our conditioning, we tend to see ourselves as seekers always rather than finders. And so I think sometimes we actually start a bit low. You know, we aim low. Who is it? Michelangelo. It's better to aim high and miss than to aim low and achieve, isn't it? And so I would just go straight for who am I? Just keep asking yourself, who am I? And notice the ego, notice the conditionality, notice the thing, and then just notice that you notice that. Notice the consciousness noticing it. And so you are the consciousness, you know?
So asking that and trying to answer it, or asking that and just seeing what comes.
Yeah, it's more of a felt sense. Yeah. It's not a mental thing. Yeah. You know, we create what we believe is our lives through our minds, but we're not that life at all. As people often find out, you know, people create life for themselves. They believe that's who they are. And then they have an illness or an accident or somebody dies on them or they get divorced and suddenly all that stuff that we thought we were is just like this. And and believing in things, it's you know, we believe, and we're completely, you know, that's a really good, but we shouldn't have to wait, we shouldn't have to, suffering, the way life tries to teach us is by suffering, because we're not actively engaged with asking that basic question of who we are. And the more we do that, I think the less suffering we actually have to do. You know, if that makes any sense at all. You know, otherwise I think, you know, maybe, you know, 3 Our Fathers, 4 Hail Marys and a cup of tea. No, I've done that. Yeah, you know, I can. Well, that's it. Yeah, that was my initial tradition. So I can give you some of that if you want. But just sitting 20 minutes times 2 a day, you know, is the best thing of all, I think, is lovely. But if it's too much, then just seeing, you know, what else, you know, yeah. And if you just can't sit, because it's not about sitting, you know, just walking meditation is wonderful. You know, and just extending your awareness, just so thinking about the kind of like the 4 levels of awareness, and just kind of just let your awareness be, and then let appreciation come through from that. You know, yeah.
You can do that, all right.
Yeah, beautiful. There you go. That's wonderful. What I did want to talk about for a couple of minutes was just because this is my kind of little theme, and something I always try to kind of push. With this authentic living business is kind of self-care, which I think is one of the most important practices, and not something we do enough of at all, really. And just realizing that the kind of the ordinary stuff of our particular lives is sacredness itself. You know, that our lives are sacred just because they are our lives. And because we are life. I think, again, very often the idea of being a seeker or looking for enlightenment or trying to get well or whatever it is, kind of can cut us off from that kind of inherent beauty and sacredness. And the kind of the fact that our lives are our lives, you haven't got any, you know, it's not the egoic life I'm talking about, but just that expression of life that's ours, that dynamic expression. You know, we have a wonderful body, and the life moves through that, and the kind of the things of our lives, even the things that we love. You know, we may sing, or we might write, or we might help people in a certain way, or we might do our yoga practice and things, and whatever, or raise children, or bake bread, or, you know, share a meal with friends. And those things are life, those are the things itself. And just to kind of let ourselves be in awareness, sort of in those situations, I think is one of the most beautiful things we can do, really. And I'm not a kind of dispenser of teachings or anything like that. I'm not built that way. It's just I just try to notice kind of what seems to work for us as human beings and what doesn't. And in my own life, I found myself very driven. As those of you who've known me for some years and things will attest, but please don't. I was angry and driven, and quite horrible to myself more than anybody else, which would occasionally spill over to other people. And and it was all that sort of believing that I had to make myself into a better person somehow, kind of driving that, and kind of almost like trying to fit in. During my Buddhist years, for example, trying to be a good Buddhist, trying to fit into a particular box, and actually realizing that that's kind of a denial of life in itself. You can express yourself through these things, or you can kind of try to fit in and be something. It's interesting that our kind of I talked about this last week, but our self-talk is the best indicator of how we're getting on, really, with ourselves. Because if we were to kind of externalize, there's a video, isn't there, on YouTube or something, of somebody kind of talking to somebody else in the same way as they talk to themselves, and it's just absolute abuse. It's the most vile thing ever. And I guess, one thing to be aware of is when we're doing our sitting practice is that layer of self-talk. Not trying to change it, but just awareness is the key to everything. Rumpelstiltskin, that's all. It's just Rumpelstiltskin. We see it, and then don't be afraid of it. Just, oh, look at that, look at that. And just noting it is enough to kind of begin a change, I think. And it's very important just to kind of put your hand on your heart and say, I love you to yourself, I think, especially during those times. So whatever kind of self-care practices we can support ourselves with, I think are, is really, really important. It's not just sort of, sit and off you go kind of thing. And particular environments take us away from caring for ourselves. The working environment can be very, very hard, especially if we have things to do with other people, and that can be very challenging indeed. Family situations, I think just relationships in general are the most challenging things of all, but they're also the best mirrors of kind of what's in us. It's not that we should take people's nonsense and things like that, but also we have to kind of look out for our own kind of self-righteousness and things. So, and yeah. So I don't know what that means. Just starting to kind of a practice of loving ourselves, I think, is probably the most important thing I can think of, really. And never mind about meditation; it's not that important. If we loved ourselves a bit better, that would just be thing. And the amazing thing is, of course, is that you don't have to love yourself, and you can't love yourself. But it's nice, you have to sometimes just kind of start almost externally. I was saying last week, and Pema Chodron's name keeps coming up tonight, and last week, one of her lovely practices is if you're going through a hard time, just imagine that it's your best friend or the person that you love the most going through that time, and consider, maybe by journaling, externalize it. What would you do for that person? How would you help them? And then do that for yourself, But what we tend to do is we tend to kind of keep it in a kind of miasma of unconsciousness, not really being aware of it, not actually looking at it. And so, one day when I have time, I might, do something. And then, of course, we fall apart and, we have to be put back together again and all this sort of thing. So let's do it before. Let's love ourselves before we fall apart rather than falling apart. Yeah, so for just continuing with Claire's question, in a way, the first sit that we did, if you're thinking about kind of home practice, there were 4 definite steps to the first thing that we did. I don't know if you've those of you who've been coming now for a while, if you notice, at some point maybe I should just do a kind of these are the 4 steps that I lead you through session Maybe I need to do that, just kind of break it down so it's very clear. So what we basically do is what I call attunement. So that's letting yourself arrive. And so if you're kind of doing your own practice, it's important to kind of give like 5 or 6 minutes to just arriving, and just kind of checking in with yourself, but not and kind of noticing that if you're trying to push the mind away, and noticing if you're trying to control your emotions and stuff like that, and kind of, and so that's kind of the first sort of 5 minutes or so. Then I tend to just go through the body and actually just kind of move into kind of awareness of life in the body, just a simple, subtle feeling of life in the body. And what that does is it kind of just moves us a little bit into consciousness, you see, and that takes us out of that kind of grip of the mind and the emotions a little bit. And this is what we did in our first bit anyway, just for if you're going to try practicing more at home. We become aware of the breath, and that increases that level of consciousness a little further. If for those of you who like Eckhart Tolle, who is a wonderful, wonderful person, he uses a very similar thing of just kind of saying, you just be aware of the life in your right hand, then be aware of the life in your left hand, then in your feet, then in the whole body, and then you just stay with that, and amazingly your awareness of self, of truth, kind of deepens, and then you kind of find yourself before your thoughts and before your emotions. So it's exactly the same process. Then what we do is we observe the thoughts and observe the emotions, so that we notice them, that we can start seeing that we're not them. So that would kind of, if it was in stages kind of thing, that would kind of be like the third stage. So we can observe from some truer part of ourselves, can observe the thoughts and the mind, or if we can't, we can at least notice that they've got a grip on us. So that leads to a very interesting question. Who is noticing? See, and in yoga, the Tantra traditions and so on, you would call this the witness. If you've ever done yoga nidra or something like that, you'll have heard the term the witness. In certain traditions, in Advaita and in yoga, they would probably say that's who you really are. And most of the time I would probably say that as well. And you just rest in that, really. When we first begin to practice, we may notice that sort of certain stuff kind of comes up in the mind, or, well, am I running away from the world, kind of thing. I'm not, and do I have to stay like this all my life? I can't do this all my life. If those kind of things are going on, then you're still very much in your thoughts, it's kind of, and the mind's playing a trick, pretending it's the consciousness. When we rest in consciousness, or the I am as I call it, you actually just have a sense of I am, of beingness, if you want to call it that. And the mind still functions, and what happens is over time, it can be quite quick, just like, a few years or something like that, or maybe even it's instant. Once you have that shift in consciousness to the kind of more true part of ourselves, the I am, then it doesn't stop the mind. The mind doesn't stop. So all these meditation practices that try to stop the mind, they're trying to do something quite impossible. We don't stop the emotions, but they start being cleaned out and upgraded. They get a kind of, because they're kind of fed by consciousness, rather than we're looking outwards now into the world, rather than looking in, trying to find something. And that's pretty much it. So that was the first practice we did. And the only thing I added to it, which is kind of is the just kind of connecting with our hearts bit, which I just think is really important. And if you find yourself completely in a mess, if you ever spot me in the co-op, I'm often like this in the co-op. The co-op seems to do it to me. So you'll find me standing in the co-op with my hand on my heart, particularly in the dairy section. Yeah, I kid you not, kind of thing. It's, being a human being is... it's those sliding doors. There you go. Yeah.
You can't get the yogurt out before the doors.
No, and you've only got two hands, haven't you? See, there you go. So if you're struggling with the yogurt and having an existential crisis in the co-op, And then, of course, there's the price of live yoga in the co-op. You know, it's a definite hand on the heart sort of thing, isn't it? You know. So there you go. Yeah. So the thing is, right?
With a different eye.
Yeah. And you know what's absolutely astonishing is you can just do all this in the middle of the road, right? Nobody notices because they're all busy believing their thoughts. You know, honest to God, they're just everybody's so in their own world. No one will notice if you put your hand on your heart, and you know, and if they do, it doesn't matter, does it? Because being a human being is absolutely ridiculous. The quicker we embrace that, the better. Really, it's beautiful and ridiculous.
What, battling with the doors in the co-op?
Battling, there's no getting around it, is it? It's absolutely existential. Nietzsche, can you imagine Nietzsche in the co-op? Or Strindberg in the co-op. That would be, never mind. Won't go there. I think I've got an idea for a story now. August Strindberg in the co-op. So, yeah, so that would be a decent practice if you wanted a 20-minute practice. Thank you for turning up tonight. Thank you for turning up in your own lives. Thank you for wanting to be in life more. Just thank you for you. Thank you.
Thank you.